Welcome into the newest episode of Side Mission. Like always, I'm your host, Rusty Ellis, joined by just one of the boys today, Kyle. Kyle, it's been a minute since we've done just a duo episode. I'm glad to be back, and we get to do a couple of those today, the day that we're recording. We get to do a couple of those. This is going to be fun. We are talking about a game that we probably should have recorded this episode for a couple weeks back, but it's all good because there's still plenty to talk about regarding this game. It is SpongeBob SquarePants, The Cosmic Shake. And I'm not going to lie, it's hard to not laugh when you're saying that title out loud. It is very hard to not laugh.
It is, yeah. Honestly, I think that this game was definitely something people who played Battle for Bikini Bottom were looking forward to. Part of me feels like this game has a lot to offer for fans of, Battle for Bikini Bottom, but at the same time, it feels like so much time has passed that this game could have offered a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? I think some of the gameplay was a little bit dated still. But some of it, I think it directly improved upon the first game because, right from the get-go, it felt like we had a lot of the main abilities that, you had to earn throughout Battle for Bikini Bottom. And from there, we were just getting more and more.
I agree. I think that you're 100% right. This feels like a game that's almost stuck like 10 years in the past.
Yeah, like we should have gotten this game earlier, and we should be on the third one by now. But as far as the game goes, in terms of, I think, art style, obviously it's SpongeBob. It's kind of hard to screw that up, but one thing that I continuously was laughing at was the damn faces that they kept showing, up close. That shit was so funny. Whoever the artist was for that did a fantastic job. I think the humor in this game
first time that happened, I was like,
yeah.
And then it happened like 20 more times, and it was incredible.
Dude, that shit was so funny. It was, and some of them are actually missable too if you don't talk to the characters. So I was glad that we got to see a bunch of them because that shit was so funny. But yeah, as far as the humor goes in this game, I think that, they landed a lot of the jokes, just like Battle for Bikini Bottom did back in the day. I think that, there's some humor there for all ages. Now, as far as the story goes, it's SpongeBob, it's not really going to have the most compelling story. However, I think that, maybe they could have done a little bit better, because one thing that wasn't really explained very well was, so in the very first world, right, they were like, hey, Mrs. Puff isn't going to know who we are because this is a completely different universe. Well, why did some of the other characters, like Mr. Krabs and Sandy and Pearl, know who SpongeBob and Patrick were in the other worlds, but some of them didn't? Like, Director Squidward knew exactly who SpongeBob was, but it was a little disconnected there.
No, I agree. I think that it's almost like they were writing the story, and they wrote that in to be like a major story beat for every world you went to, and then it's almost like they spent so much time on that first world that they almost just forgot that entirely when writing the rest of the story out. Like, they just kind of glazed over that detail of, oh, Mrs. Puff had no idea who we were in the first world. All of a sudden, everybody in every other subsequent world knows who we are now. Yeah, it does feel like they glazed over that a bit. Also, and I think that this is one thing that Battle for Bikini Bottom did well story-wise, was at least it set up the story with a cutscene, prior to the exact conflict being, settled. There's really no explanation for how, I'm going to be honest, I can't remember what her name is, the main antagonist in the game. The mermaid. There's no explanation for how she came up with it, or how she acquired this stuff that she supposedly stole from King Neptune. There's no explanation of how she stole it or anything, and I feel like this story would have benefited from having a cutscene that showed that happening. And I feel like that kind of helps. It kind of, I don't want to say it makes the story believable, because at the end of the day, it's SpongeBob. SpongeBob isn't believable. It's a kid show, but I don't know. It didn't really help that we were supposed to just believe that this bum ass mermaid
Yeah.
stole from the most powerful deity in the sea. It's just we're supposed to believe that that happened and that she got away with it, no problem, and that King Neptune isn't looking for her or anything like that. I don't know. There's just not really much of an explanation for that. I feel, and that
Yeah.
doesn't help the story at all. Now, of course, as we've said with so many games in the past, you're not necessarily playing this game for the story, but it's there. We kind of have to critique it. It's the same thing we said about Saints Row. It's the same thing we've
Right,
said
right.
about Hogwarts. That episode has dropped hopefully by now. Is that you're not really playing these games for the story. You're playing it more so for the gameplay. But unfortunately, with the story is such a big part of the game, we kind of have to keep it. We have to keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about the platforming a little bit more, Kyle, because I think you're spot on. It absolutely feels dated, and it feels like it's kind of stuck in 2005, 2006. It's just kind of stuck. It feels like a game from that era. Now, it doesn't feel nearly as janky as Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated felt. That felt much, much jankier, if that's even a fucking word.
Yeah.
But I really feel like they tried to make it a little more modern. And I give them credit for trying. The gliding system is a really nice addition. I think
Yes.
that works. Um, I think the other thing that I really I was hit or miss on was the levels because let's be real here. I think outside of Glove World, which I'll be honest with you, I have not beaten Battle for Bikini Bottom in years, so I don't remember if Glove World was in Battle for Bikini Bottom. I don't
I
believe
actually
it
don't think it
was.
was.
Yeah, I didn't think it was either. A lot of the areas are just kind of modified versions of the levels you got in Battle for Bikini Bottom. Like
That is true.
the very first world you go to is the Wild West Jellyfish Fields. That's the first area you go to, and then the second one is Karate Bikini Bottom Downtown or Karate Bikini Bottom Downtown. I'm not saying it, that stupid way to say it in the show, but I feel like they could have gotten a little bit more creative because not only do you go to a lot of the same levels, you go to them in just about the exact same order.
Yeah, that's very
And
true.
the only real difference here is I don't think you go to the Murmur layer in this one. And
Yeah.
outside of that, I feel like it's pretty much the exact same beat for beat levels outside of Glove World. Now, that being said, Kyle, the levels are really well designed. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that honestly, the levels were, because when we first got in, I noticed right away that when we went to Jellyfish Fields, I was like, this is just the same level from Battle for Bikini Bottom. Downtown was, again, downtown from Battle for Bikini Bottom. And I felt that, some worlds, like the Halloween version of Rock Bottom, were really cool. And then the other one, like the prehistoric world, just was kind of meh. I mean, the best part about the prehistoric world was Patrick and SpongeBob, how they were the prehistoric versions of Patrick and SpongeBob, which
Yeah,
that's another thing. The costumes in this game are a lot of fun. I think that that was a great addition because it added a little bit of customizability, and that wasn't in Battle for Bikini Bottom. And with each world you go to, you obviously get a new costume, and there's
I
all
agree.
of this jelly around that you can collect, which is kind of like the currency. You can use that to buy different costumes, and I thought that was really cool. I wish, honestly, they could have taken an approach kind of like Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, where when Link puts on a different mask, he gets a different ability, a different moveset. I wish that the costumes would have been more tied to, say, abilities. Obviously, you could have had, a little bit less costumes if each one was going to have an ability, or just have story ones that, when you put on this costume, you can use like a lasso and, wherever you go in the Jellyfish Fields, and have like a quick change button for, the costumes. Because I think that on top of us getting the, glide ability, I felt like there wasn't really much added for traversal. It was very much the same as Battle for Bikini Bottom. You got a double jump. You could slide, on pathways, and now you can glide, which is cool. But there wasn't really anything else added, like from Battle for Bikini Bottom, and imagine if we got a suit that let us, fly around, or a suit that could, because in the other game there were other playable characters, and that's how they kind of added in that new moveset. Like you could play as Patrick, or you could play as Sandy, and they had different things that they could do. And in this game, you solely play as SpongeBob. You don't play as the other characters. And I really wish I do like that we got some new abilities like the reef blower and what is it? The instead of the bowling bubble, now you like throw it essentially.
Yeah, you can throw the bubbles using, your jellyfish net, I think is what it is. And again,
Yeah.
you like some of the modifications they did, but it also just kind of feels like they kind of just, I don't want to say half-assed it. I feel like that's a little bit too harsh. But
Right.
it feels like they kind of look for, okay, what's a way that we can slightly change this to where it doesn't automatically get compared to like the bubble bowl, for example.
Right.
Like, and there's part of me that respects that they tried, but again, you feel like they could have gone a little bit deeper.
I think that they definitely could have gone deeper. They, you know, I get that this game wasn't supposed to be a 10 out of 10, but I was a big fan of Battle for Bikini Bottom. I played the shit out of it on the GameCube. I grew up with the game, and when they remastered it, I was really excited to replay it, and it kind of reminded me, that oh shit, this really was a GameCube era game. And so when they announced that they were going to be doing a spiritual successor, I was excited because I never got a sequel to Battle for Bikini Bottom growing up. This is the closest thing we're going to get to it. And I was so ready to, get that sequel to a game that I've been waiting for like 15 plus years. And
Yeah.
I would say that this game, I think, was very middle of the road. It was not fantastic, but it also wasn't horrible. I know we've been critiquing it a lot, but it wasn't a horrible game by any means. I had fun playing through it. There were a lot of fun sections throughout these different worlds where you interact with, different characters like the witch, or like Pearl, or Larry, or even a giant snail, Gary. I think that there were a lot of things that, really worked, like the humor and the art style. Those damn pictures, dude, the close-ups, they're so fucking funny. But while, you're trying to balance the humor
Yeah.
with the story, I think they definitely leaned a bit too much on the humor and didn't really, because here's another thing that I really was confused by. So when we would go into worlds, right, we were going there to look for one character. Like in the first world, you go in there to look for Mr. Krabs, or you're going there to look for, Mrs. Puff, or you're trying to find Pearl or Squidward. But other characters show up. Like, for example, Sandy shows up in the first world, but then she also shows up in the second world. Why didn't SpongeBob just take her with him in the first world? I feel like, I get that they wanted to have, all of these characters showing up in these different worlds for, say, the interactions. But what if we had just made each world tied to one character and maybe fleshed out that story a little more instead of trying to cram so many characters in it, because then you end up with plot holes like, hey, aren't none of these characters supposed to know who SpongeBob and Patrick are? Why can't he just take two when he took a whole fucking house one time?
I'll give you another criticism that I know we both had, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet, dude. And this is a trend in gaming that has got to stop. Repeated dialogue, man. Constantly
Holy
repeated
shit, yeah.
dialogue. I don't know how many times we had to hear the words, the Krusty Krab pizza is the... Like, dude, I think in the first 2 hours of the game, I heard it like 8 times.
Yes.
At a certain point, dude, like, again, the humor works for the most part, but if you're going to make a game in the SpongeBob universe, at least have the creativity to add other lines of dialogue in.
Yes.
Like, at least have a little bit of more effort in the writing department of adding a few extra lines of dialogue, adding a few extra just kind of idle lines that characters may utter if you're just running through a level. There's nothing really going on. There's no cutscene or interaction happening. It just kind of feels like it's repeated far too often. And it was annoying enough, and this is going to sound like an overreaction. It's going to sound like an overreaction, but it's not. And I think you agreed with me when we said this when we first played the game. My favorite world that we went to was the prehistoric one where SpongeBob and Patrick were cavemen because we didn't have to hear that line over and over again because they couldn't talk.
Yep, that's very true. They couldn't talk. That was the best time because there wasn't a single time out there I heard a little dabble do ya. That
I
shit.
swear, dude, that shit was annoying too.
And it was every 5 minutes. It would not go. I mean, without fail, you're running through the level, and it's just either Krusty Krab pizza or Little Dabble Do Ya, and it's just over and over and over. Like, bro, I wish there was an option like High on Life gave us to turn that shit off. That's one thing that I think High on Life did, as an example to the gaming community. That needs to be in every fucking game, everywhere. Give me an option to turn that dialogue off. If SpongeBob could just not speak outside of dialogues, I would have been fine. After hearing those voice lines 8 times over, I was like, okay, I don't need to hear him say this over and over and over again. I wish I could turn this shit off. And that spreads to so many games. That's a big issue that we have with fucking games that do that shit. Why is there no option to just turn off character dialogue? High on Life did it. It's obviously not that hard. You could just give us that. And, without getting a little bit, too off topic, other than that, though, I think that the character interactions and their voice lines, bringing back all of, the classic characters and their voice actors, outside of, obviously, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, because they can't. But everybody else I thought was really cool. It was cool seeing, because when you play a licensed game and it's not the same voices, it's so jarring. And that was one thing they knocked out of the park, was the voice acting in this game was fantastic. I just really wish I didn't have to hear those lines over and over. That's my biggest critique with the voice acting, is maybe a little bit less idle bullshit. Now, the ending of the game was interesting because, like we said, this mermaid stole this magical jelly from King Neptune, right? And at the very end of the game, you beat the final boss, and then King Neptune comes in, and he's just like, oh, hey, you're the one who has my magical jelly. And then he just fixes everything. So basically, King
It's
Neptune...
all a MacGuffin.
Yeah, King Neptune could have came in at any point in time and just fixed it. But we had to go on this whole adventure. Like, I really wish that it was, somehow SpongeBob that fixed it, or Patrick. To have King Neptune just come in at the very end and just fix it, I was like, so this was all for nothing? You could have done that from the very beginning of the game when you found out that the jelly was missing? That's wonderful.
Well, that's what I meant when we talked about like how much it would have benefited from having a cutscene earlier on. Is there's no explanation whatsoever as far as why this mermaid has been able to escape and evade King Neptune. There's no explanation for that, and this is where that would have helped. And again, it just feels like a little bit of a cop-out with the ending. It just feels very cop-outish. And I think that the thing that makes it worse is, it says the words, oh, I'll grant you one wish because of it. And Patrick's stupid ass comes along and says, I wish we could do all of that over again. Resets everything. And now, guess what? Now you can do all the collectathon stuff that you missed in the story. You can do it all again. It basically resets the world back to where it was. And it's just like, it all feels way too convenient. And it doesn't have this natural flow to it. And again, I enjoyed playing this game. I thought the boss fights were really good. I thought the Gary boss fight particularly was really good. The final boss fight was really good.
Yeah.
Loved the downtown level, the second level of the game. I loved that because, again, it felt like it had its own kind of style to it. It felt like, there's kind of this more third-person open view of, that you see a lot of in Bikini Bottom or Battle of Bikini Bottom, but then it turns into kind of this 2D side scroller for a little bit, and I
Yeah,
thought
that was
that was
cool.
really unique to the level, and I liked that, and I enjoyed that. And then the medieval level again, really interesting. I like how the final boss fight really isn't even a boss fight; it's just you serving food to
Yeah.
all the people at Pearl's slumber party. Like
Yep.
it's like there are things in this game that work really really well. It's just that it feels like there wasn't a ton of effort everywhere else. And the last thing we could talk about, Kyle, is the performance because man, for 80% of the game, it runs great, but it'll just randomly have this moment where it freezes like mid-level, and then it
Yes.
starts you back out, and you're like 15 FPS, and the game has to get caught up, and it's like, guys, we are at this point, and this is almost crazy to say, we are going into this November will make it 3 years since since the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles came out. Make it 3 years. We are already about to be 3 years deep into these consoles. There is no excuse for there to be this kind of performance issue with this game. There's no, because it's not even that graphically intense of a game to begin with. It
Yeah, it's
just
really not.
seems like there was. It just seemed like there was a little performance bug the entire time. That in the middle of a level, you'd randomly freeze up for like three or 4 seconds, and then it'd go right back to normal after it got caught back up to what you were doing. Like I don't know. Like I want to give this game a 7. I really do. But the more and more I think about this game, the more and more I just feel like a 6 is just the correct score for me, at least. I don't know. Like I can't give this game higher than a 7. There's just no way possible. And I think that it was either IGN or GameSpot. One of them gave it a 4, and I thought that was a bit extreme. I was like, I don't think a 4 is pretty bad. Like a
Yeah.
4 means that you didn't have any fun whatsoever, and I had a lot of fun playing this game. But just from a critical standpoint, Kyle, this game is so hard to judge because we both really were looking forward to it, and I won't say that it was necessarily disappointing, but there were definitely parts of it that did not meet expectations.
Yeah, I think that this game definitely could have done better. The game was fun. That's the best thing I can say about this is the game is, at the very least, a lot of fun to play. But if you are looking for a brand new experience, if you're looking for something totally unique, this isn't it. This is a game that if you enjoy the SpongeBob games like Battle for Bikini Bottom, if you like that kind of silly, goofy humor, you will probably enjoy this game. From a critical standpoint, I would have to give it about a 6.5. And that's as high
Yeah,
as I could probably go because the game would have made a 7, 7.5 for me if it ran better. I think that all critiques aside, as it goes to the writing or the gameplay, the performance just wasn't there. And I have to believe that part of that comes from them not dropping a PS5 version. It was
yes.
PS4 only, which doesn't make sense when we are what 2 year on the second year of the life cycle for next gen consoles. The game should not be releasing solely for last gen consoles in 2023. I
I
think,
agree, and that's not necessarily to just shit on
yeah,
PS4 owners or Xbox One owners or One X, One S. It's not to shit on them. It's more so just like we've reached this point in gaming where, guys, at some point you've got to commit to next gen, and these consoles are readily available. We can't
yes,
use the shortage anymore as an excuse.
agreed. It's
So,
it's gotta move forward at some point, and this game was definitely a telltale of hey, maybe it's about that time.
and it happens to every generation. I mean, this happens to every generation at some point, man. I mean, Nintendo is probably the only game company in existence that will continuously support older hardware. Like they
True.
just recently stopped with DS support. They just recently stopped it, or they're planning on stopping that soon. One of the two. I probably sound really illiterate right now, but who knows? But like PS3 was cut off fairly quickly after PS4 came out.
That's true.
PS3s did not survive. They weren't 3 years into that cycle. They weren't still getting games because
Yeah.
PS4s were readily available. Microsoft somewhat does it with backwards compatibility. They allow you to play older Xbox and Xbox 360 games, but you don't just go into the store and see you couldn't buy Hogwarts Legacy for Xbox 360. You couldn't buy that for PS3. There's a reason why Hogwarts Legacy, for example, was really touted as a next-gen title, was because it was primarily marketed for next-gen systems, for the PS5, for the series.
Right.
So, and Kyle, I don't know about you. This is something I think we need to revisit in the summertime or closer when this happens. There's part of me that almost wants to see what Hogwarts Legacy runs like on the Switch when that port comes out.
Oh, man, yeah.
I feel like it's going to run like absolute shit. But that's the whole point of all this, is that at some point, you can't just release games for PS4 or Xbox One anymore. We've got to advance. We've got to move forward. So that is our review for SpongeBob SquarePants: The Cosmic Shake. That's going to do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Side Mission Pod, and you can check us out on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For one of the boys, for Kyle, I'm Rusty. Thanks for listening.